Hello, everyone. I welcome you all to this live session by Scalar Academy. And just give me a quick confirmation if all of you can hear me and see me properly. And if everything is proper, we'll start off with today's session. I'll also maybe wait for a minute for more folks to join in. And in the meanwhile, what I'll do is I'll set up the agenda for today's session. So C++ is a very popular language. It's an evergreen language and it's used for a wide variety of purposes. And if you are a beginner, so let's say if you're in your first or second year of engineering and haven't yet started learning this awesome programming language called as C++, then this session is especially for you. Also, maybe if some of you folks are from a non-tech background and would have come across this language called as C++ and must be wondering what exactly it is, this session is exactly what you're looking for. So in today's session, we'll see how much can we cover. So we have a 1 hour session. In this, we'll cover all of the fundamentals. So we'll start off with data types and variables. Then we'll look at the different flow control statements. Going ahead, we'll work with functions. And then finally, we'll also look at arrays in C++. So if the agenda seems proper to you guys, just give me a thumbs up. And also to all of the folks who are just joining in, and if you haven't yet subscribed to our channel, I request you folks to hit the subscribe button and also like the video. So the YouTube algorithm works in such a way that if you like the video, then more people would join in and it would help us a lot. Karthik, hey, I'm doing awesome. Hope you're doing well too. Great. So on that note, let me just start off by sharing my screen. Great. So folks, what I've opened up is the Eclipse IDE. Now you have a lot of IDEs to work with C++ programs. The most popular ones, if you're in engineering, I believe would be Turbo C++. You would have that blue colored, very 90s window, isn't it? So you have multiple IDs. You can use Turbo C++, Dev C++, Eclipse. There are a lot more as well. You can also use Visual Studio Code. So for this purpose, what I'm using is called as Eclipse. And now what this does is this makes your coding process much more smooth. So if you have prior coding experience, if you have maybe worked with other programming languages, whether it's Python, Java, or C, you would know that working with an IDE makes your coding process much more simpler. And that is exactly what we are using over here. So great. Now, this is right now what you see in front of your screen is the sample template of a basic C++ program. Now, let me also just verify if you can hear me properly. Let's just okay, great. So seems like you can see me properly and hear me properly. Now that that's said, I will continue over here. So now if you want to write any program, these are some things which are a must. So you have something called as namespace st. Now we'll come to that a bit later. Let's understand what exactly this is. Hash include IOStream. So if you're maybe an engineering student, probably you would have just ratified this statement over here. You just add this into your program. But what exactly is this? So hash include, this is known as a preprocessor directive. Now, this would mean that before your program execution starts, you're actually telling the compiler to include this header file. So there are a lot of header files in C++, and one header file which we'll definitely need for input-output process is known as the IO stream. So we have included hash include IO stream in our program over here. And with the help of this, if you'd want to maybe display something on the console, you can do that. If you'd want to take input from the user, you can do that. So this function cout, right? So cout is a function which is part of this header file IO stream. So if you want to use this function, you will definitely have to include this header file. If you'll not include this, then you'll get an error. Then coming back to this, using namespace std. Now, we'll again properly understand what are variables and data types. So first understand, let's say you're sitting in a classroom, you'll have a lot of sections, isn't it? So if you're in school or if you're in college, probably you'll have section A, section B, and section C. Now, let's say in section A, you have a person named as Rajat Kumar. Let's give him a really long name. Maybe his entire name is Rajat Kumar Sisodia Aluwalia, right? So this is his entire name. His entire name is Rajat Kumar Sisodia Aluwalia, and his roll number is 4. Now it turns out that there is another Rajat Kumar Sisodia Aluwalia in section B as well, and his roll number is also 4. Again, it turns out that there is another Rajat Kumar Sisodia Aluwalia who's in section C as well, and his roll number is also 4. So how do you distinguish between all of these three people? The section, right? So you have one Rajat Kumar Sisodia Aluwalia in section A, another one in section B, another one in section C, and another one in section D. So here, this namespace, you can consider that to be your section. Now, what happens is whenever we are writing our program, now let's say we have multiple sections, and in those multiple sections, we can have functions with the same names. So let's say if I have a function called as add, and that is in one particular section, I can have the same function with the same name in another section, but I would have to use a different namespace. Now, for now, just understand this with the help of a namespace. Understand that you are creating a section, or basically you're creating a bubble, and in that bubble, you can have your own variables and functions, or basically your entire object ecosystem. So now that we've understood these two lines, then let's come to int main. So when it comes to int main, this consider this to be your brain of the program. Right, so this is where the program execution starts, and this is where the program execution ends. You can also call this to be the CPU of your program, or basically this is where the entire thing happens. Now, every function has something called as a return type. So for this, I've given the return type to be int. Now this would mean that this function has to return something of integer type, and that is why I've written integer 0. So which would mean that I'm basically returning nothing. So again, if this seems too complex for you guys, just wait a bit. We'll understand all of this properly. For now, just look at this as your sample template for every C++ program. And here we have something called as a cout. And with this method, we are printing something out onto our console. Now, instead of hello, let's say if I were to write scalar academy, and if I were to execute this, you shall see that here in the output, I have Scalar Academy written. Similarly, if I change this and maybe write C++ YouTube live, again, when I execute this, you shall see that you have C++ YouTube live. So whatever you put inside cout, that will be displayed onto the console. So now that we have seen the basic template of the C++ code, let's start off with the fundamentals of C++. And again, whenever you're dealing with any programming language, so prior to this, I had taken lives on Python and Java as well. And there I told you guys that when it comes to any programming language, what you're basically dealing with is data, isn't it? Because when you're writing program, what are you doing? You're essentially dealing with data, right? Whatever program it is, it might be a 2-line code, or it might be a 10,000 line code. What you're essentially doing is working with the data. And when you're working with the data, you'd have to store that somewhere, and this is where variables will come in. And now, what is a variable? Consider a variable to be a temporary storage space. It's a temporary storage space because you can change the values which are stored inside it. Now, I'll give you an example. So again, let's say you go to your kitchen, you'll have all of your dabbas or containers or tins over there. And let's say first you go ahead and store a chips packet in one of the container. Now you feel hungry, you finish off that chips packet. And now, since that container or that tin is empty, what you can do is you can go ahead and store another chips packet in that. Now, again, when you finish it off, maybe you'll store another chips packet in that. So what you're doing is, so you're replacing the values, or you're replacing the item which is stored in that container, and that is essentially your variable. So I'll just give you guys an example. I'll have something called as int a is equal to 10. So I'm creating a variable of integer type, and initially I'm storing the value of 10 inside this. And if I would want to display this onto the console, I'm using cout, and I would want to display the value which is stored in this variable a. Let me execute this. And you shall see here that I have displayed 10 onto the screen. And since this is a temporary storage space, I can change whatever is stored inside here. Now I'll change the value of 10 to be 20. And this time when I execute this, you shall see that the value has been changed to 20. Similarly, let me change this to maybe 209. And now when I run this, you shall again see that the value has been changed to 209. So this is an integer data type. Now we have other types of data as well. So your data can be of character type, your data can be Boolean, your data can be string, and so on. Now let's have an example of maybe some of the other data types as well. Before that, let me just go to the chat and see if there are any more questions. Karthik is asking, what about hash include stdlib? There are headers like that as well, right? Yes, Karthik. So consider the header file to be a toolkit or a toolbox. And now maybe let's say if you are going for fishing, and for fishing, probably you would need that fishing hook. You'd probably need some worms. You would need other equipment, isn't it? That entire toolkit is your header file to go and fish. Similarly, you'll have different header files for different purposes. And this just provides you different functions with the help of which you can perform different operations. So that is the basic idea behind a header file. Priya is asking which is better for DSAlgo, C++, or Java. Priya, for this, it would boil down to whatever language you're comfortable with. Here you'd have to maybe introspect a bit, because I personally, whenever I'm implementing DSAlgo stuff, I prefer Java because I'm more comfortable with Java when compared to C++. But on the other hand, let's say if you're more comfortable with C++, you can go ahead and use that. It will totally boil down to you. What is important over here is to properly learn the concepts of DSAlgo irrespective of the language which you're using. DSAlgo is essentially problem solving. If you're a good problem solver, then the language shouldn't really matter. Ridmal is saying it's C++ program, its input can be returned as cout. Yes, cout is normally used to put something out on the console. Pooja is asking what is the significance of hash include iostream. So Pooja, I've answered that. So iostream is your header file. And with the help of iostream, you can use your functions such as cout and cin. And hash include just means that I'm instructing the compiler to include this header file. So this is known as a preprocessor directive. And with the help of your preprocessor directive, you're including this header file. Right. So folks, you can put in all of your questions in the chat. I'll keep taking them up parallelly. And also, if you have any suggestions, put them up. And if you haven't yet subscribed to our channel, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button as well. So we were about to look at other types of data. We've looked at integer type data. Now probably we'll look at Boolean type data. What exactly is Boolean type data? You have something called as true or false, 0 or 1. Let me write down bool is equal to true. I would need to give an variable over here. I'll have bool x is equal to true. Then I'll have bool y is equal to false. So now that I have these two, I will go ahead and display this. Cout x, cout y, and when I run this, I actually have 1 and 0. Now I have 1 and 0 because true is 1, false is 0. Right? So this is basically your binary system. 1 and 0, 0 and 1, yes, no, true and false. And this is what you use your Boolean values for. Then we have something called as characters. So I'll write down char, probably I'll call this as char a. Inside this, let me store the value z. And now if I want to print out a, let's see what the result would be over here. And as you see, when I print out a, you will see the value z over here because that is the value which I've stored in this variable. So this is about the variables and data types which we have. Now let's head to something called as operators. So operators, again, if you work with different programming languages, this would help you to perform basic operations on your data. You have arithmetic operators, relational operators, and logical operators. So we'll start off with arithmetic operators, which are addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication. Now, let me again create two variables over here. I'll have int a is equal to 10, then I'll have int b is equal to 20. Now that I have these two set, if I want to perform some operations, let me just have a plus b. What I'm doing is I'm adding 10 plus 20, which is equal to 30. When I run this, you will see that I've successfully printed out 30 over here. Similarly, if I perform a minus b, and when I run this, you shall see that I have minus 10 because 10 minus 20 is equal to minus 10. Now, if I were to change the sequence or the order, I will have b minus a. And when I do that, you shall see that I have the value 10. And that is because 20 is greater than 10 and 20 minus 10 is equal to 10. Now let me perform b into a. So I'm multiplying these two values over here. And 20 into 10 gives me a value of 200. And now let me perform division. I'll have b divided by a. And when I run this, you will have the value 2 over here. So these are arithmetic operators. Now, after arithmetic operators, let's look at relational operators, which would be less than, greater than, not equal to, and double equal to. So again, we'll have the same variables over here, a and b. I have 10 inside a, 20 inside b, and I would want to check if a is less than b. So I'll put this inside parentheses over here. And when I run this, I get the value 1, which would mean that this is true. So is a less than b? Yes, 10 is less than 20, and that is why I have 1 over here. Now, when I perform a greater than b, I'm checking the relation. It's a greater than b. And when I check this relation, I get a 0 because this evaluates to false. Because 10 is not greater than 20. Now, if I were to put in a not equal to b, so this what you see exclamation mark and equal to, this is known as the not equal to operator. And when I run this, again, you will have 1 because obviously the value of 10 is not equal to the value of 20. Going ahead, I will just check if the value of a is equal to the value of b. And when I run this, here you shall see that I have 0 because 10 is not equal to 20. So these are the basic operators. So we've looked at variables, data types. Now we've also looked at operators. Going ahead, what we'll do is we'll look at some conditional statements. So in conditional statements, we have something called as if else. To give you guys a real world scenario, let's say if you have an exam coming up and your parents say that if you score more than 95 marks in the exam, they'll buy you a pizza, right? Probably they'll say you'll get 5 pizzas. Now if you get more than 95, you'll get 5 pizzas. On the other hand, if you get less than 95, then you'll not get to watch television. So what is happening over here? Your parents are giving you a reward punishment situation on the basis of a condition or on the basis of a result. And this is what if else is used for, right? If marks greater than 95, you will get 5 pizzas. If marks less than 95, you are not allowed to watch TV. So we'll use the same concept in C++ as well. For this, again, let me probably have the same variables. I'll have 10 stored in A, then I will have 20 stored in B. Now, I would want to check if A is less than B. And if A is less than B, I'll just want to print out A is less than B. Now, let me run this and see what shall happen. So here, If inside this I've given a condition which is a less than b, since this condition is evaluated to false, I'll print out this. Now, on the other hand, if this condition were to be evaluated to false, so if I were to give, if a is greater than b, so is 10 greater than 20? No, that is false. Since that is false, we will skip whatever is present inside the body. Now, when I run this, you shall see that this is blank because we've skipped whatever is present inside the if body. Now, to avoid these sort of situations, so let's say if whatever is present or the first condition fails, then you'd have to do something else. In those situations, I have else. So inside else, I shall write down if failed, executing else. Let me put in a semicolon over here and I'll run this. Now you will see in the result, you'll get if failed executing else. This is because this condition has failed and will skip whatever is present inside the body of if, will directly head to else, and in else we have if failed executing else. So this is how you'll work with if else. Now after this we also have something called as if else ladder. Let's also have a glance at that. Let me delete this entire thing over here. Before that, let me head to the chat and see if there are any more questions. Helvetic team is asking which is the best programming language for a beginner if I'm starting out, that is. Helvetic team, there is, so again, when you say best programming language, it all boils down to what is it that you'd want to implement and what are you comfortable with. So since you're a beginner, do not, I'd say, do not keep those sort of preferences or do not keep those sort of inclinations. Just pick up one programming language, whatever it is, right? Maybe let's say, just open YouTube or Google. Let's say you just feel that today I'd want to learn Java. Open up the Java tutorial and be a master in Java. As simple as that. You'll gain expertise in that. From there on, you can build up. Right. So as a beginner, just pick up any programming language because execution is much better than just thinking on should I pick this, should I pick this, or should I pick this, right? You'll just keep wondering and there'll be no execution over there. Arjun is asking what is operator precedence in C++. So operator precedence, it just would mean that, let's say if you have plus and minus, or maybe in mathematics, you would have learned the BODMAS rule, isn't it? So BODMAS basically stands for brackets of division, multiplication, addition, subtraction. So that is pretty much the same in C++ as well, right? So when it comes to the different operators, first, let's say if you are comparing your plus symbol with a division symbol, your division symbol would get a higher precedence or higher priority. Similarly, if you're comparing your subtraction operator with a multiplication operator, your multiplication operator will get a higher precedence than your subtraction operator. Mrinal is asking, is there full course for this program? So Mrinal, we are working on a full course. Probably will upload that in a week's time or 2 weeks time. You can just keep an eye on our channel. Whenever you get the notification, you can go ahead and check that out. Mrinal and Scalar Academy to enroll. So Mrinal, we don't provide a course specifically for C++, but then again, if you're interested to enroll, with respect to Scalar Academy, you can just go ahead and check our site. And if you're interested, you can reach out to any of our academic counselors. Great. So what we've done is we've had a look at basic if else. Now we'll also have a look at the if else ladder. For that, let me perform a simple program. I'll have three numbers. I'll have A, inside A, I'll store the value 10. Then I'll have B, inside B, I'll store the value 20. Then I'll have C, inside this, I'll store the value 30. So I've got three values over here. Now I'd want to check which of these variables is the highest, or which of these variables has the highest value. For this, what I can do is I can use an if else ladder. I'll start off with if. I'll give in the condition. Let me use another parenthesis over here. If A is greater than B and A is greater than C. If these two conditions are satisfied, I can go ahead and print A is the highest value. So if A is greater than B, A is greater than C, this evaluates to true. I can just go ahead and print this. On the other hand, if this evaluates to false, I'll give in another condition. I'll write if else, and here I'll check if B is greater than A and B is greater than C. If B is greater than A and B is greater than C, I'll have B is the highest value. So this will happen if this is evaluated to true. Now, if this also evaluates to false, I'll have one final else statement over here. And in this final else statement, I'll have C is the highest value. This is set. Now, let me just go ahead and execute this and let's have a look at the result. And here, as you see, let me just give space as well. And when I run this, you will see the result 30 is the highest value. So what exactly is happening over here? Let's start with this condition. We are checking if A is greater than B and A is greater than C. So is 10 greater than 20? No, that is false. Is 10 greater than 30? No, that is also false. False and false evaluates to false. We skip this entire thing. Then we come to the next one. Here we are checking if B is greater than A. So is 20 greater than 10? Yes, that is true. Then we check if B is greater than C. So is 20 greater than 30? No, that is false. So here it becomes true and false. True and false also evaluates to false. And since this is false, we skip this as well and finally head to the else statement. And in else, we just go ahead and print out C is the highest value. What is stored in C? 30. And this is exactly what we are printing out over here. So this is your if else ladder. Now we'll go ahead and work with looping statements. I'll delete this entire thing from here. I'll have looping statements written down. Looping statements. Now, looping statements, there'd be cases where you'd have to repeat a particular action, isn't it? That action could be anything. So, for example, let's say you have a bucket and you'd have to fill it up with water, but you can only do that with a mug. So, what you do is you take your mug of water, you pour it into the bucket, and you check if that bucket of water is full or not. Again, you take another mug of water, you pour it into the bucket. Again, you check if your bucket is full or not. And you keep repeating this process until your bucket becomes full of water. So, what are you doing here? You are looping a particular action until a condition is met. And that is exactly what looping statements in C++ also do. Here we have two looping statements. One is called as while, then we have for. Let's look at both of them. I'll start off with the while statement. For this, I'll have a variable called as I. Inside I, let me just store in the value 1. Now that I have stored this, I'll have the while loop started while I is less than or equal to 5. I would want to do something. What do I want to do? I would want to print out I, and let me give a space over here, and I would also increment the value of I. Now, when I run this, let's see what actually happens. So here in the result, you see that with the help of this while loop, I've been able to print out 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. What is happening over here? Initially, the value of I is equal to 1. I had this loop, I check if 1 is less than or equal to 5. Since that is evaluated to true, I enter this loop, I print out I. What is I currently? I is 1, I print that out. Then I go ahead and increment the value of I becomes 2. I go back, I check if 2 is less than or equal to 5. That is evaluated to true. I enter inside, I print out 2, then I increment the value of I. It becomes 3. Is 3 less than or equal to 5? Yes. Again, since this is true, I enter the loop, I print out 3, then again I increment the value to 4. 4 is less than 5, I print out 4. Then again it becomes 5. Is 5 less than or equal to 5? Yes, true. I enter, I print out 5. And finally, this time when I increment the value of I, it becomes 6. And when I check if 6 is less than or equal to 5, this condition fails. And when the condition fails, I exit this while loop. So this is a very simple example. Now, let's say with the help of this, I were to print stars, right? So here I've just printed out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Instead of this, if I were to print stars, all I can do is I'll just put in a star symbol over here. That's pretty much it. And when I run this, you will see that I have 5 stars over here. So this is how you can loop something and repeat a particular task. Next up, we have another looping statement called as for. So for is a bit interesting because you have the initialization task, condition checking task, and incrementation task in the same for body over here, or the for parenthesis. I'll write down int I is equal to 0, I is less than 5, I plus plus. And here, what do I want to do? Maybe I want to print I plus 10 each time. And now when I run this, let's have a look at the result. Let me also add in a space over here so that there is proper distinguishing. Right. So initially I value was 0. Since I value is 0, I go ahead and check the condition. Is 0 less than 5? Yes, that is true. Since that is true, I enter the body of for, and what am I printing out? I'm printing out I plus 10. What is 0 plus 10? It is 10, and I print out 10. I go back, I increment the value of I becomes 1. Since I is 1, is 1 less than 5? Yes, that is true. Since that is true, I again enter the body of for. Here I have 1 plus 10. 1 plus 10 is 11, I print that out. I go back, increment the value of I, it becomes 2. Is 2 less than 5? Yes. This is also true. I again enter the body of for. Now this time I have 10 plus 2, which is 12. And this is how I keep on repeating the process. And finally, when the value of I becomes 5, I check if 5 is less than 5. That condition evaluates to false. And since that evaluates to false, I exit the body of for, and this is what we have printed out over here. So simple stuff, isn't it? So we've looked at while loop and for loop as well. Pradal is asking, sir, how if A is true, then output would be A is less than 3? I'm not able to exactly understand for which part is this. Probably if you can elaborate this a bit more, I can go back and tell you. So folks, if you have any questions, put them up in the chat window. I will take them up. And if you if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, I remind you again to hit the subscribe button. If you haven't yet liked the video, I would urge you to like the video as well. That would help us a lot. Great. So we've looked at this. Now let's do something interesting with these for loops. We'll have something called as nested for loops, where we'll have one for loop inside another for loop, and we'll build a pyramid sort of thing, or maybe a triangle sort of pattern. So what I'll do is, first let's go through this program, and then probably I'll guide you through what is happening exactly over here. I'll have int I is equal to 0, I is less than 5, and I plus plus. So this is the outer for loop. Then I'll go ahead and have another for loop inside this for loop. I'll have j. I'll set j is equal to 0. j is less than or equal to I, j plus plus, and what do I want to print out? I would want to print out maybe a star, and after this I will just have a new line over here. So let me have backslash n. So this is done, and when I run this, let's have a look at the result. So what is happening here? I've sort of printed out one side of a pyramid, isn't it? I have this triangle sort of thing. And let's understand how are we able to print this out. Initially, I is set to be equal to 0. So as 0 less than 5, yes, that is true. Since that is true, I'll enter the body of outer for loop. And in this, again, I'll check this condition. If j is equal to 0, j is less than or equal to I. J is 0, I is 0. So is 0 less than or equal to 0? Yes, that is true. Since that is true, I'll enter the body of inner for loop and I'll print out this star. After printing the star, I'll go back here, increment the value of j. J becomes 1. Now, when I check if 1 is less than or equal to 0, this condition fails. And since this condition fails, I will exit inner for loop. I'll come over here and I'll print a new line, which would mean that my cursor will be over here right now. Right? My cursor will be at the second line. I go back, I increment the value of I becomes 1. Is 1 less than 5? Yes, that is true. Since that is true, again, I enter this body. Here, j again starts from 0. I'll check if 0 is less than or equal to 1. Is 0 less than 1? Yes, that is true. I print out a star. Go back, j's value is incremented, j becomes 1. Is 1 less than or equal to 1? Yes, that is true. Again, I enter this body of inner for loop. I print out another star. Going back, I'll increment the value of j becomes 2. This time when I check if 2 is less than or equal to 1, the condition fails. And since the condition fails, I'll exit this as well. And I'll go ahead and print out a new line so my cursor will turn up here. After this, I'll go back. Now, i's value is incremented, i's value becomes 2. Since I value is 2 and is 2 less than 5, yes, that is true. Since that is true, I'll enter here. Again, here what I'm doing is the same step. J starts from 0 and goes up till 2. 0, 1 and 2, I'll print out 3 stars. And as j becomes 3, this condition fails. I'll exit this. I'll have a new line. Again, here i's value becomes 3. I's value becomes 3. This time I'll print out 4 stars. Then i's value becomes 4. This time I'll print out 5 stars. And when finally I becomes 5, this condition fails because 5 is not less than 5. So this is how we are able to print out this pyramid pattern or triangle pattern. So if you're a fresher and if you're applying for the fresher roles, you would probably face a lot of these pyramid problems, and this is one of the simplest approach of how you can solve this. So now that we are done with this, we'll head to something interesting. We'll deal with arrays. So till now we've only been working with variables. Now the problem with variables is you can only store one value at a time, right? And let's say there's a situation where you'd have to store multiple values, and if it were a classroom of 100 students, and if I had to store the names of all of these students and the marks of all of these students, I would need 200 variables over here. 100 variables to store all of the names and 100 variables to store all of the marks. Now that's a huge task, isn't it? Right? And also keeping track of these 200 variables, well, you probably, wouldn't even know where the program is heading if you have 200 variables. So for this, what we have is something known as an array. So array, with the help of an array, you can store homogeneous elements in the same place. So it's a homogeneous data structure, and all the elements are stored in contiguous memory locations or continuous memory locations. And each memory location has an index. And in C++, the index value starts from 0. So your first element will be stored at index 0. Second element will be stored at index 1. Third element will be stored at index 2, and so on. Let's go ahead and create a very simple array. So we'll be creating a single dimensional array over here. I'll write down array. Let me put in 1D over here. I'll have int a3. What have I done over here? I have declared an integer type array whose size is 3, which would mean that I can store 3 elements inside this array. Int a3. Now, as I said, indexing starts from 0. So in the index 0, let's say I store the value 5. Then I have index 1. In index 1, I store the value 15. Then I have index 2. In this, I store the value 25. So I've created this array. I've also stored the values. Let me go ahead and print out the values now. And if I were to print out the values, I would need a for loop. I'll have int I is equal to 0, I is less than 3, I plus plus. And within this for loop, I would just go ahead and print out a of I. So a of I, again, let me give in a space over here. Initially, I value is 0. I'll print out a0. I value is incremented, it becomes 1. Then I print out a1. I's value is incremented, it becomes 2. I print out a2. And this is how I would be able to print out whatever values are present in this array. And now when I execute this, here you shall see that I've printed out 5, 15, 25. 5 is present at index 0, 15 is present at index 1, and 25 is present at index number 2. So very simple array where we have hard-coded the values over here. Now, if you were to take the values from the user, that is also something which we can do. Let me delete this entire thing over here. And before I show you how can we take values from the user, let me head to the chat and see if there are any questions. Karthik is asking, can I use C++ for machine learning? Absolutely. C++ is actually one of the main languages which is used for machine learning apart from Python and Java. And I believe Facebook does a lot of machine learning with C++, right? So let's say if you want to become a machine learning engineer or a data scientist, then learning C++ is really helpful to you. Right. So as I was saying, let's see how can we take values from the user. So for this, I'll write down cout, enter 3 values to be stored in the array. And before this, I'll go ahead and create my array. Let's say int x. Again, I'll keep the size as 3 over here. I've declared the value. And I've given the cout statement. Now, after this, what I would want to do is, with the help of a for loop, I'll go ahead and take in these values. I'll write down int I is equal to 0. I is less than 3. I plus plus. I open up the body of this for loop, and now I'll have something called as cin, not cout. I'll have something called as cin, and I'll have the value stored in a of I. So this is actually x of I, not a of I, because x is the array which we have created. So what will happen is the first value which the user gives in, that will be that will be stored in x of 0. The second value which the user gives in, that will be stored in x of 1. The third value which the user gives in, that will be stored in x of 2. So this is how we are storing the values. Again, if we were to print it out, I would need another for loop. I'll have for int I, let me actually take j this time. For j is equal to 0, j is less than 3, j plus plus. I'll write down cout. What do I need to print out? I would need to print out x of j. So this is how, again, what I'll do is I'll give in space over here so that this looks proper. Let me run this. Right. So here, this is something which I've printed out onto the console. Enter 3 values to be stored in the array. First value, let me give in 12. Second value, I'll give 23. Third value, I'll give in 34. And here, as you see, I printed out the values which are stored in the array, which are 12, 23, and 34. Let me just add another cout statement over here. I'll take this, I'll paste this over here. I'll change this to be values in the array are. Let me add in a new line prior to this. And when I run this time, again, let me add in three values. I'll have 45, 56, 67. And as you see, values in the array are 45, 56, and 67. So this is clear. Now, probably what we'll do is we'll do a very simple array operation. We'll create two arrays and we'll add up the values which are present in the two arrays and store that in a new array. Let me delete this entire thing. Now, I'll have an array called as m probably. Let me give in the size to be equal to 5. This is done. And I'll have another array called as n. Again, let's keep the size to be equal to 5. This is also set. First, I'd want to store in the values into the array m. I'll put in a print statement. I'll have enter 5 values for array m. And those values I need to take in and store in m. I'll have a for loop over here. For int I is equal to 0, I is less than 5, I plus plus. I've created this for loop, I've opened up the body, and I need to store in the values. So I'll have cn. I need to store the values in m of I. This is done. I'd have to repeat the same step for the array n as well. What I'll do this time is I'll write down cout enter 5 values for array n. Let me also give in a colon over here so that this is more proper. Now again, let me go ahead and add in another for loop. I'll have again int I is equal to 0, I is less than 5, I plus plus, and this time, since I've created this for loop, I can just go ahead and store in the values. I'll have cn, and I would need the array n, and I'll have n of I. So here what you're basically doing is first value gets stored in n of 0, second value gets stored in n of 1, third value in n of 2, and so on. So we've created these two arrays, stored the values in these two arrays. Now what I'd want to do is add the corresponding elements or the subsequent elements in both of these arrays, which would mean that I'd want to add m0 with n0, m1 with n1, m2 with n2, m3 with n3, and so on. So I'd want to perform this entire thing and store that into a new array. Let's call that new array as, I'll call this as, let's say, t. Again, I'll keep the size as 5. For this is the main logic, right? So this is where we'll be writing the main logic. I'll have another for loop over here. Again, this will start at 0, go on till 5. I is equal to 0, I is less than 5. Then I'll have I plus plus. I'll open the body of this for loop, and inside this, what I would want to do is I'll have t of I is equal to m of I plus n of I. So I'm adding the corresponding values which are there in m and n and storing them into t. This is set. Now I would want to go ahead and print out the values which are stored in t. I'll have another for loop over here. Before that, let me add in a cout statement. So I'll have cout values in array t. Again, let me add in a proper new line over here. Here also, I'll have a new line so that this is clear. This is set. I'll have one final for loop. And in this for loop, again, starts at 0, goes on till 5, I plus plus, and inside this, I will just go ahead and print out the values which are there in t. So I'll have t of I. I'll give in a space after this. This is set, and when I run this now, this is what I'll have. So here I first need to give in the values which are there in M. So I'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Then I need to give in the values for N. Let's say in N I store 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Here you shall see that this is the result. What am I doing? 5 plus 1 becomes 6. 4 plus 2 becomes 6. 3 plus 3 becomes 6. 2 plus 4 becomes 6. Again, 5 plus 1 becomes 6. And this entire thing I've gone ahead and stored into this array T. And that is exactly what I've printed out over here. Right? So this is a very simple array operation. Hopefully you guys were able to follow this. I don't see any more questions over here. So folks, any questions, any suggestions, put them up over here. I'll take them up. Right. So we're left with 10 minutes. Probably we'll do one final thing for today. I'll delete this entire thing and we'll look at functions in C++. Let me just show you guys a very simple example of a function. What I'll do is a function, as I said, has a return type. So I'll create a function called as add. This also takes in parameters. I'll have int x, int y. I'm creating the body of this function over here, and I will just return x plus 5. I've created this. I would want to print out, let's say I pass in two values, 5 and 6 inside this. This is done. Let me go ahead and execute this. So you shall see that I've printed out 11. So what have I done over here? I've created a function called as add. Now, what are functions? So functions, you can consider them to be simple modules. So if you are creating a really big application, now you can break that really big application into small modules, isn't it? So let's say if that application were a calculator. For that calculator application, you can have separate modules. One module could be for addition. Next module could be for subtraction. Next could be for multiplication. Next could be for division. Now, if you would want to add something, you can just go ahead and invoke the add button. Similarly, if you were to subtract something, you can just go ahead and invoke the subtract button. And that is pretty much what we are doing over here. I've created a simple module or a method or a function. That is what I've created over here. And the return type of this function is int, which would mean that this would return an integer type value. And this takes in two integer parameters, x, y. Right, so this is the body of the function, and I'm calling that function from inside my main method. Here also you'd have to keep in mind that the other auxiliary functions or other subsidiary functions which are creating apart from the main function, all of them have to be invoked from within your main function. So here I'm just printing out add. Inside this, I'm passing into integer values 5 and 6. 5 goes into x, 6 goes into y, and what am I returning? I'm returning 5 plus 6. So this is how you work with functions in C++. So folks, I guess this would be it for today's class. If you have any suggestions for whatever we've covered today, you can put that up in the comment section after the live is done, and we will definitely take that up. So thank you very much, folks, and we'll meet in the next one.